It's just gone past 9 now, or it's 9 o'clock now. And I would like to warmly welcome you this cold Friday morning. This weather's been very strange lately, to our Standing Committee on Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism. My name is Kayla Murray and I'm the chair. With that, I would like to give the members an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then from there we'll hand over to the department. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Andrikus van der Westhuizen, member of the committee.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Khalil Brankes, member of the Finance Committee.
Morning, Chairperson. Morning, members and everyone on the platform. My name is Nomi Nkondlo. I'm a member of the committee. Thank you.
I see.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mbulelo Isaac Sileku, member of the committee. Good morning.
Thank you, member. And with that, I do see the minister online. Minister, can I hand over to you to do introductions for yourself, of course, and for your department? Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning to the honourable members of the committee. We're happy to be here with you this morning. My name is Mireille Wengen. I'm the Provincial Minister responsible for finance and economic opportunities, which includes tourism. I'll then ask the team to introduce themselves, please.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, Chairperson, members of the committee. David Savage, Head Official of Provincial Treasury. I'm joined by Shirley Robinson, our Chief Director for Public Policy Services, Malcolm Boyson, our Director for Fiscal Policy, and Nizelle Palmer from the Fiscal Policy team as well.
Thank you very much. And with that, just a warm welcome to everybody who's joined us today, from the Minister, HOD, members, officials, and to all who may be watching us as well online. With that, I haven't received any apologies so far, and I just want to quickly go into the house rules. So all very familiar with them, but just to quickly recap, throughout the duration of the call, if you can kindly keep your videos off and keep yourselves muted until it's your turn to speak or you're called upon to speak. If members have any points of order, they can do so by raising their hand in the Teams function, or they can also make their points of order in the chat function. And with that, I think we can then hand over to the Treasury so that we can look at the repeal bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I believe we're the first part of the agenda this morning. The Provincial Treasury will be briefing the committee on the Western Cape 19th Gambling Amendment Act repeal bill. And this largely comes about as a result of changes in the environment, and the context here is very important. The Treasury has prepared a presentation for members of the committee on the bill, as well as the context and the legislative environment. I'm not sure if HOT, if you'd like to make some introductory remarks, but I believe Shirley Robinson will be leading the presentation this morning. Thank you.
I will leave it in Shirley's capable hands, Minister.
Thank you. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, Chair, committee members, Minister, HOT. And I'm going to share my presentation. Is the presentation clear?
Indeed.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you, Minister and committee. So, as Minister noted and introduced, this morning's presentation is on the Western Cape 19th Gambling and Racing Amendment Act repeal bill of 2023. The background and the timeframes are that the amendment bill was introduced in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament on the 21st of February 2019. Its objective was to amend the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Act of 1996 to promote and facilitate the financial self-sufficiency of the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board. The Act provides for certain fees to be payable to the board, charging of casino operator fees, amendments to provisions to limited gambling machine operator fees, and it was reintroduced on the 30th of January 2020 as the legislative process was interrupted by the provincial elections. It was adopted on the 20th of May 2021 and is sent to the Premier in June 2021. The Western Cape 19th Gambling and Racing Amendment Act was published then on the 23rd of June 2021, but that was at the start of the what we now know as the COVID endemic. It was the very early months, so it was not brought into operation, mainly due to the impact of COVID-19 on the gambling industry. What was that impact? We now see in hindsight that it led to significant structural change in the gambling and racing industry. I'm going to refer committee members to the graphs on the right, where you can see in the first graph the percentage share of Western Cape gambling revenue by type of gambling. You see that casino or land-based is in orange, was over 70% in around 2018, but has moved to a significantly lower share in orange in the latest year. And you will see the same trend in the gambling revenue, which is on a rand value in the second figure underneath. What has led to the rise is a significant increase in the grey, which is sports betting, racing, bookmaker and totalizer. So what happened? That was a significant change in the fundamental technological advances that were spurred on by COVID that impacted on the industry structure, moving away significantly from land-based gambling into different forms of gambling, particularly sports betting. It really highlighted the need that we need to review gambling and racing environment within the broader post-pandemic economic context. Our policy needs to be responsive to a dynamic gambling and racing environment. It needs fundamentally to consider the significant technological advances that have impacted on industry structure with a shift away from land-based and the growth potential really in moving to online sports betting. So understanding this and cognizant of this structural change, Provincial Treasury has been undertaking a comprehensive policy review of the Western Cape gambling and racing environment, considering appropriate legislative reform in the process. It's important that we take a holistic view and that we stay ahead rather than track responsive to technological changes. That said, promoting and facilitating the financial self-sufficiency of the board still remains an important objective. So we are looking at the overall journey of the policy journey, and the status to date is that the amendment of the economic aspects of gambling and racing environment, an assessment was finalized this year, and we are considering various legal opinions moving forward. So members, this brings the rationale of the Amendment Act itself. If the bill that we propose for the repeal of the Amendment Act is that if the Amendment Act of 2019 were to be brought into operation in 2023, it would be completely outdated and incompatible with the structural developments in the gambling and racing industries following the significant technological change that has happened post-COVID-19 pandemic. In this instance, it is prudent and rational to repeal the Amendment Act. So, committee members and chair, we place before you the objective of the Western Cape 19th Gambling and Racing Amendment Act repeal bill is to repeal the Amendment Act. Clause 1 of the bill provides for the repeal of the Amendment Act. Clause 2 provides for the short title, extremely short bill. The consultations that the draft repeal bill was published for public comment in the Provincial Gazette dated 2nd of December 2022, and Provincial Treasury did not receive any objections to the proposed repeal of the Amendment Act. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. With that, I'd also like to acknowledge that we have in attendance today Advocate Astrid Muller from the Department of the Premier, and we also have Advocate Romeo Marstorp from the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Members, we will now open up for an opportunity to ask questions to the presentation. If you could please raise your hand. I see that Member van der Westhuizen has already done so. So over to you, Member.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. What I find interesting is that the motivation for the 19th Amendment, be it to make the gambling board more financially self-sufficient, that has now been confirmed as something which remains. Whereas when we considered the 19th Amendment, I couldn't understand really why changing the end destination for funding would make such a big difference. Again, I can't understand why now changing it back to Provincial Treasury doesn't make sense, except if I can play devil's advocate. What we've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a high increase in revenue from the gambling industry, and all credit to the industry for recovering from a terrible impact of COVID-19. Now, again, with that approach of being devil's advocate, it seems to me now that the income has increased considerably, meaning that the chances of the gambling board becoming financially independent has increased, as well, that now we want to say, whoa, here is a source of income that might now be lost to Provincial Treasury. And I would love to get the responses to that, because the motive or the motivation for the 19th one has now been confirmed today, has not changed. We still want the gambling board to become financially independent. The second one is, Chair, regarding those, what you call the general legal opinions on the amendments that are to come. And may I again say, to have amendments on an annual basis to legislation cannot only be, ascribed to a dynamic industry, etc. I hear these beautiful terms, but normally in terms of legislation, you want to look ahead, you want to predict the future, and you want to provide for all kinds of potential changes in drafting legislation, and then these kind of smaller tweaks or adjustments are normally then left to regulations. So I would love to just get some insight, if you could share with us what the 20th and the 21st amendment bills, the legal opinion on that indicated, because it might be that those two amendments are still to come to Parliament within this term. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member. I recognize Member Nkondlo.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the short presentation. Chair, having had the presentation and the fact that this bill is coming back to us now for a repeal, 2 years after it was assented to by the Premier. And for me, I would want to understand, how do we justify such with all the costs that would have been involved in putting up, in working, going to the public to arrive at a bill that we had then agreed on, and it was approved by this Parliament. That 2 years later, we are saying this bill must be repealed. And I'm raising this, Chair, because at a time, as I think the presentation indicates, that by the time this bill was assented to, I mean, we remember, all of us, by 2021, we've already somewhat exited the pandemic period. And I recall in the conversations during the repeal, the issue of the implication of COVID was one of the biggest, I think, drivers that was discussed intensively during that particular process, with presentations, including by the board itself. Even talking about, the online gambling that will be coming on board. So these things were anticipated. So I'm trying to understand what then, after such, what would have happened actually in these 2 years, if the colleagues can explain to me, from when in 2021 to date, when this bill was accented to, what would have happened? Because I'm concerned about an environment that creates instability to the gambling and racing environment because of continuous legislative changes that are being made. So that's the first one, Chair, that I'm trying to understand. The second one is, I want to understand at this point, there is a general legal opinion reference and a specialized tax opinion that is being mentioned. Can we be explained in detail? What are those? What do they mean? Do we have copies of those, which also can help us understand the veracity of these legal opinions in as far as this issue is concerned? So those are the first two questions, Chair, I would like to understand before I further, because I'm just trying to understand the rationale of a legislation that we had approved almost 2 years ago, and the costs that would have entered. And I would like the colleagues to mention what would have been our cost of that process that we'll have to repeat now and justify to the public that will have to go another round, in repealing this particular legislation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think we have a very robust round of questions, and I'm excited to jump into them. But before doing so, I would also like to take the opportunity to ask some questions. So, one of the questions I was going to ask as well is, the bill has been in existence essentially for 2 years, and why are we repealing now? But I think my colleagues have really gone into that in great detail. With regards to the assessment finalized in February this year, what are the next steps, if that could be outlined for us as well? And then my last question is, how will the board be funded then in the interim? Thank you. I'll hand over to the Minister. Oh, I recognize Member Branke.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, and good morning to everybody again. Chair, can I just get the indication that financially, how much will a repeal process, how much, some estimate, how much a repeal process will actually cost WCPP? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll hand over to the Minister.
Thanks very much to the committee for the questions. I'll ask the Treasury to assist me here. So generally about the board and its funding, several questions around there. Then a number of questions around the legal work that's being done and around particularly the 20th and 21st bills that will in due course come to the committee and which the committee will be briefed on. Next steps, and then there's questions around the repeal process itself and costs associated there. Shirley, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. In respect of Member van der Westhuizen's comment and the motivation to make the gambling boards self-sufficient is confirmed as remaining. And here we want to draw attention to the impact of the difference in taxation and fees. So while gambling revenue has been increasing, If we refer back to the slide presentation, you'll see, member, that the structure of the industry has been changing. And so this needs considerable that the revenue is not the same as fees. The revenue is tax revenue that comes back to the Provincial Revenue Fund to be allocated out in the provincial fiscal framework and budgeting process. Fees respond and provide for the board's self-sufficiency. In respect of the question later on, the fees, until the aspect of fees are resolved, there is a transfer from the provincial fiscus in addition to existing fees. So if we had to look at the remaining questions, the aspect of why the bill was being repealed in 2 years, members, even in 2021, we did not have the data and evidence at that point, as we were coming out of the COVID-19 epidemic, to anticipate the scale and the long-term impact on the industry. That has only become really apparent in the last 2 years, that as gambling has resumed, that structure has not rebounded to an earlier structure. And so it would be imprudent, members, to continue with the Amendment Act in its current form, because the structure has changed. And the intention of the policy review process is to provide in exactly what members have requested, is to provide a very evidence-based and well-researched and founded approach to a proactive gambling policy with associated legislation. So, members, that is the clear rationale in respect of, we will look at find the data on the costing of the repeal process. We also note that this particular engagement deals with the 19th Amendment Repeal Bill, and further engagements will look at the 20th and 21st, but it's not the subject of this engagement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any further inputs from the department? I see none. Members, are there any further questions? Apologies. I see Minister is unmuted, but I'm not able to hear.
Chair, there's Ms. Muller would like to make an input in addition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note quickly that in respect of the legal opinions, they do relate to the 20th and 21st Amendment Bills. And it's important to note that the legal opinions are privileged and confidential, and the mere reference thereto by the department in the presentation should not be understood to mean that the department has waived confidentiality or their privilege in respect of the opinions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions or no further inputs from the department, then we'll take further questions, recognizing firstly Member van der Westhuizen and then Member Nkontlo.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I do think that the Honourable Nkontlo asked about the costs of, first having to go through the process of introducing a bill and then repealing a bill, and I missed the response to that. The second one is, my understanding is that the fees would have served as the main income, apart from, I presume, penalties or fines and so on, as the main and also I think the Gambling Board is also charging fees for like inspections and so on. Yet the presentation is quiet on fee revenue for the gambling board. If we could just get an indication in perhaps a similar graph to the income from gambling, which I understood now from Ms. Robinson to be, the fees are not necessarily in line with the tax income from gambling. That perhaps if we should just get an indication of how the fees also changed over the last few years. And then, Chair, I must say, I hear what you're saying, that legal opinion is confidential, but I do find it interesting that it was necessary to refer to that, which means that it did influence the decision to bring this repeal bill to Parliament. Now, while the detail of that legal opinion, I think I accept that as being confidential. I think the effect of such a legal opinion and the fact that the legal opinion may have influenced this whole repeal bill, I think is indeed of significance and therefore of importance to this committee. And I think, playing open cards, we should just be informed of whether any of those opinions, although they were asked for the 20th and 21st, had an influence on the request that has now come to Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. I recognize Member Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to add to the last point Member Andrikas has raised, because I'm not understanding. Perhaps the colleague from the department can explain more about the legal opinion that is confidential to a committee that must lead lawmaking in a process of repealing a law or a legislation that had to go through this particular committee. Because indeed, how do we become empowered, to continue processing, legislation as our competence, as this sphere of government, when the executive were told the basis from which to do such is confidential. Confidential to who? To us as lawmakers. I'm not understanding that aspect. If the colleague can explain that. And I'm raising this because one of the things I'm interested in to understand is that I recall during the time that we were doing this particular process, indeed, industry in particular would have raised serious concerns, and I think others even had to threaten to take the matter to court, because they were making suggestions to say some of the aspects, of the amendment are unconstitutional. And one is interested because I think they would have been presented to us as the committee, a different opinion. So it's important to juxtapose that at this point so that we know and we don't make the same mistake. So I'm interested to know whether indeed was there any particular lawsuit or legal opinion from industry in particular about, the constitutionality of this amendment of this bill, actually, that would have been one of the causes that the department is bringing it back for repeal. And that is why, for me, it was important to understand this legal opinion. So I'm interested to understand that if indeed there was any lawsuit from the industry between it and the department on the matter of this bill, and whether such, if it did happen, it is actually part and parcel of the basis on which the department is asking for a repeal to this piece of legislation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before I take Member Seleko, I do see the hands of Ms. Muller and also the Minister. So perhaps we can just allow them to jump in case there was something missing or not brought to our attention there.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a couple of things, sorry, from the rounds of questions. So there were a number of questions about the funding of the board itself and what are the implications. So the implications are that we'll now have to look through cost savings and efficiency gains for the board's funding, and the board has some savings as a result of new accommodation, which will help in that respect for the sustainability and funding of the board itself. And so hopefully that deals with that question. Then just to say that, I understand the members' frustration that there are continuous amendments to an old act. And I agree that we need to review the policy environment for gambling, because we can't be continuously amending this old piece of legislation on an annual basis. And I fully understand the frustration of the members. And that's exactly what we're moving towards, is reviewing the policy environment and towards a green paper and eventually new legislation with evidence-based, thorough research, etc. Then just on the legal opinion that was mentioned, just to be clear that those legal opinions that were mentioned in the presentation have no influence on this process. It was just to show the ongoing work that is happening in parallel here. It's also incomplete, these legal opinions. They're not concluded. I haven't even seen them yet. So it's just so that we don't conflate different processes here. I think it's just important for the committee just to understand the context of those legal opinions. It was just to show that there is this ongoing work in parallel to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Sorry, I saw the hand of Astrid Muller.
Thank you, Chair. I think the Minister has adequately dealt with the issue of the legal opinions. I really just wanted to clarify that the legal opinions deal specifically with the 20th and 21st Amendment bills, which deal with relocation, whereas the 19th Amendment Act Repeal Bill deals purely with the repeal of that specific act. They are completely unrelated. So that is why in the presentation, the heading was the 20th and 21st bills, and it's completely unrelated. It doesn't deal with the current subject matter before the Standing Committee.
All right, thank you. With that, members, I realize that some of your questions may have been answered, but let me open up the floor again, and let's just see if you have any further questions, follow-up questions. I did see previously a hand from Member Seleku, but that went down. So I'm going to treat that as if his question has been attended to. Firstly, Member Nkondlo and then Member van der Westhuizen.
Chair, again, my questions are not being answered. One, on the costs of the repeal, and the cost that we spent on the bill that now we want to repeal. My question is not being answered about if there was any lawsuit from industry on the constitutionality, because I'm hearing now, initially we're told that we can't access, it's confidential. Now we are told that it's unrelated. It just does not make sense, Chair. But can I be answered on the questions that I've asked?
Thank you, Member. The question is noted, and I hope the department will also speak to that. Then Member van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Honourable Nkondlo, if I recall correctly, raised the whole issue of the costs, and I will be proposing a resolution later on that we do go back and just quantify the cost that just this provincial parliament incurred in considering and then adopting the 19th Amendment Bill, and that we just have a budget or a costing for the potential costs of repealing this now as well. But Chair, my question regarding the fees and the potential changes in those fees over the last number of years, and the fact that it might seem as if the board might become financially independent now, seeing that the tax income has increased. I would think that the fee income may also be on the increase, which would then have said, to me, indicate that the potential was there for the board to become financially independent, as was hoped for or envisaged when we some 3 years ago considered the 19th Amendment bill then. The point that I raised then, which was then responded to by the department, was that in general, government doesn't like to ring fence sources of income. The levy on fuel, for example, which was motivated many years ago to go towards the maintenance of our roads. Eventually, government loves these different sources of income, pool it, and then wants to reallocate those sources of income to where it is needed most. Now, what we're going to achieve, in my understanding of this, is if we now again repeal the 19th Amendment, that those fees, etc., would flow to provincial treasury, who would then again draft a budget for the gambling board, asking of the gambling board to operate within their budget, etc. So the principle of pooling all forms of income, I think, is a generally accepted one. And my question, therefore, is that not the motivation why we now need to repeal that the policy on not ring fencing and allocating different sources of income to different entities, but rather pooling that? Is that not a sensible motivation? Because just I fail to see how the changes in the industry as motivated this request for us to repeal that bill. As I've said, I can understand it if there's a general policy on income generation and how that should be treated within the province. That would make sense to me. But I'm afraid in the presentation, the nice words of this being a dynamic, and there have been some changes to the industry and so on, that in itself does not, in my book, explain the rationale for repealing the 19th Amendment. And I would need some more detail to be able to understand that. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. With that, I think we will hand over to the department to speak to some of the questions. And I have no question further from my side. Yeah, all right, I'll hand over to the department. Thank you.
May I come in, Chair? I think
yes,
certainly in terms of the issue of the costing of the legal exercises, from certainly the repeal from the provincial treasury side, I mean, it hasn't been resource intensive. We could, I guess, try and cost staff time. For the WCPP, we wouldn't ourselves have that information. In terms of the costs that were generated by WCPP, we could certainly provide guidance on perhaps how to calculate them more and so forth. But that's obviously not in our immediate domain. On board fee income, we can certainly, I mean, it is in their financial statements, and we can certainly compile that and provide it to the committee and how it's changed over time. I think, Member van der Westhuizen, your questions around why would they ring fence and become self-sufficient really goes back to the economic theory, essentially, when you have when you want to preserve the independence of an economic regulator. so that it is a neutral party in the environment. Then that would be one of the cases in which you consider ring fencing of funds so that it becomes self-sufficient and is not subject to any outside influences. The reason that the change, and I think as Shirley Robinson tried to outline, the reason that there was the change in approach is that the structure of the industry and therefore the tax incidence has changed. I'm not sure if that's clear enough for the member here, but there are different tax regimes that apply to different parts of the industry, of the gambling industry as a whole. The structure of the industry has changed, and that therefore changes the sort of income that can be expected from the various parts of the industry because they are subject to different tax regimes. And that's exactly why we want to respond to these changes in the underlying industry structure, particularly the growth in online, and not introduce a regime that may not deliver a fair incidence of the assignment of costs to the industry, while still looking to achieve long-term self-sufficiency for the industry. In the interim, as the Minister had mentioned, there have been there are discussions on how we can reduce costs, find efficiencies in the board, and so forth. Yeah. So I hope that deals with most of the questions. And then Member Nkondlo asked the question: is there any litigation on the bill? Not to my knowledge has there been litigation on the bill, but perhaps Ms. Muller could comment on that.
Thank you, Ms. Muller.
Thank you, Chair. There is pending litigation in respect of the matter, in respect of the Amendment Act, but not this particular bill. But my understanding is that Provincial Treasury, they would have to jump in, but my understanding is that they consider the matter holistically as set out in the presentation before deciding whether or not to repeal the Act. So COVID-19, the structural shift in the industry, and also information received from the industry stakeholders all assisted in Provincial Treasury then realizing that there was a need for reconsideration of the gambling landscape. So yeah, I don't know if Provincial Treasury wanted to elaborate on that.
Is there anyone from Provincial Treasury? Okay.
No, I could just confirm that. I mean, I think the presentation laid it out quite clearly. I mean, we're not responding to litigation here because, as far as I'm aware, there isn't anything that's in court. It's around this bill. But the question is really, how do we respond to dynamic changes in the industry that have changed the structure of the tax base?
All right, thank you. I do think we've had quite a robust conversation on this, but perhaps just an opportunity for final follow-ups. I recognize Member Nkondlo.
Chair, perhaps one would put this on resolution, because the HOD says according to him there isn't, and then Ms. Muller says there is something pending, and then she moves and raises other things. So I'm gonna be asking for specific, what is that a legal opinion? Specifically, isn't there a legal opinion between the department and the Southern Sun on this particular matter, on Sun International Grand West Casino, on this particular matter, on the constitutional nature of the bill that were asked to repeal, and what is its implication? So if colleagues must just be straight to us on this matter so that we understand them, so that if they're not related, let them say they're not related. We can't have one saying, no, there is something pending, and then the other one say it is not. So I'm trying to understand indeed, because we know for a fact that industry was up in arms, particularly the likes of Sun International. So I'm trying to understand whether this has got any relationship with it and what has been the department's process on that particular case. So if so that we do not elongate this conversation, Chair, I would place that on the resolution and request that information that would be provided by the department to the committee. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I've noted that as an upcoming resolution, and I don't see any other follow-ups from the members. So with that, I'm not sure if there are any closing remarks from the department or from the Minister.
No, just thanks to the committee for the questions.
All right, thank you very much. To the department, we will now move on with our own way forward with the bill. I'm not sure if that's something that you would like to stay for, but you are welcome to exit for this portion of the meeting. Member Nkondlo, sorry, is that a legacy hand?
Oh, sorry, Chair. Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you very much. And we understand that we've asked some very tough questions today. And we've done this, of course, in the spirit of being democratic and being transparent. And at the same time, we do appreciate that there is a lot of work going on to make sure that we are taking the right measures to support the gambling industry, which is a significant industry within the Western Cape. So we really do appreciate your time and the preparations that you have made for this. With that, members, let's take a minute or so for the department and officials to leave, and then we'll move on to the way forward.
Thank you.
All right, members. So in terms of the way forward for the bill, the question that I first want to put to you is on public hearings and the number of public hearings. To my mind, this bill is of an extremely technical nature, and I might propose, but I'd put it to you, that we look to have one public hearing in Cape Town in the chamber. We can do this in a hybrid format for anyone who's not able to attend or travel long distances. Possibly in October. That looks like a date. That looks like a month where our calendar will be a little bit more flexible. But I'm going to put that to you and see if there are any thoughts on that. Member van der Westhuizen?
Thank you, Chair. The bill itself is actually not technical. It is quite simple. So in terms of the process going forward, where we invite the public to comment on this, I think I can anticipate that it would be the industry that would be perhaps as well as the board itself, whom we haven't engaged, that they would be the ones interested in this. I don't think that the person doing the gambling, etc., is that much affected by the introduction or the potential repeal of this the piece of legislation. So yes, I agree with you. I think thanks to the possibility of having hybrid sessions, we can obviously invite people from actually all over South Africa to learn from best practices, etc. So I fully agree with you that we don't need to go to, can I call it, smaller towns, etc., that we can have that public hearing in Cape Town. But can I also say, Chair, to a large extent, I think our decision should be led by the responses to advertisements to invite the role players and the public to comment on the bill. As I've said, I'm anticipating that there won't be that many coming to us in this regard, but I could be completely wrong. So I think we should actually also be considering going out advertising on the national newspapers. In this case, I would like to propose over perhaps weekends in the major languages, and that we then invite the public for comment. But for now, in terms of scheduling, that we only schedule that one. As I've said, this is not final, perhaps, depending on the volume of comments, which as I've said, anticipate to be relatively low. But let's not bind ourselves to a final figure today. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned it's not a technical bill. I agree, it's a repeal bill, but I think by technical I mean there's a small interest group of people who are quite technically proficient that would be interested. And so that's why I think we can concentrate it. But thank you for your support on that. I do recognize Member Nkonhla.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I would request that before we even consider the public hearings, we first get the information required. One, actually, from where I'm sitting, I'm not necessarily comfortable to even give a thumbs up to a public hearings on a process that, from where I'm sitting, I'm still having unclear answers. One, if we can request the department together with our public outreach, just to get the costing of the process we went into on the bill and what will be the possible cost of this one. Two is to request this information from the department about these legal opinions, particularly the one on the Sun International about the constitutionality, which is amongst the issues that would have brought this particular bill to be repealed. Because this is 2 years into the bill. And as lawmakers, we must be able to accept if indeed we made a incorrect or misinformed. And at one point, I think one of the colleagues was saying we could not be able to have a well-researched, information at the time. So I'm interested that if needs be, can we ask the department to come back, even if we do a special meeting, to try and clarify these particular issues? And I'm raising this, Chair, because one of the things that even in the last discussion we would have discussed is the location of the gambling board in Treasury versus in economic development. Because if there is an economic imperative of why now we are finding ourselves 2 years later having to repeal something that we concluded on and plunging industry into, again, another legal instability, because the piece of legislation is still not concluded. Surely, from where I'm sitting, it seems, you see, where we would have looked at a department that oversights this, that has got an economic mandate, economic function role, it would have been able to anticipate. It would also be able to have the data requisite, because Provincial Treasury is not necessarily going to be sitting and doing, unless there is a specific, as they did now, research. So I'm raising this, Chair, to say from where I'm sitting, I'm requesting that we ask the department, even if for an urgent meeting, to just clarify this information to us, and then we can go on the public hearings. That is just a view that I hold. Then after, we can hold the public hearings, which could be 1 or 2, because in any way, even if it is low, according to the Constitution, we've got a responsibility to open up public hearings to everybody and not preempt that people are not going to be interested. Let them not be interested, so that we're not found wanting. That would have, closed in terms of the scope of consultation with the public, because from where we are sitting, we've already preempted that people are not interested in the legislation. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And then just to the point, before we go to Member Seleko and then Member van der Westhuizen, I do want to just check with Zahida. Zahida, is it, just in terms of your procedural guidance, can we be taking resolutions while we deal with the way forward in the bill?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, we can take these resolutions. The way forward on the bill are actually resolutions in any case.
Okay, thank you. And then also, costs to the repeal, and I think this is for you and for Member Nkondlo, are we looking here at the costs to the department, or are we looking at the costs to Parliament? What figures are we looking for exactly here?
We're looking for both, Chair, to arrive at what was the cost of this process would obviously, because it's a joint process between us and the department. So we're looking at the department figures and our figures so that we know what has been the total cost.
Okay. And just before I proceed, one thing I would like to say is, members, it to my mind appears that there is a lot of history with this bill, and of course I'm quite new still. So I do appreciate the feedback that you've given, the detailed questions that you've asked with regards to this, just so that we make sure we're taking the appropriate steps necessary. I do want to just check in with Zahida. So if we are looking to do a public hearing in October, which I think gives us a good amount of time to get any information that we might need, what is your feeling in terms of the costs and in perhaps requesting if there's a legal opinion? Thanks, E.
In terms of Member Nkondlo's, in terms of Member Nkondlo's request for the costing on the repeal bill, I would need more information. So, for example, if we're going to go on, okay, we're having one public hearing in Cape Town, that's good information to work with. But then the members would also need to decide the type of advertising, where the advertising, etc. So I would have a better idea on how to cost.
All right, and then on that question as well, Member Nkondlo, would you be looking at the retrospective costs or the costs that we will be incurring as a result of this repeal?
The retrospective, Chair, because I'm sure we can ascertain on an average what is our cost of public hearings in general in Parliament. Meaning the costs that we incurred retrospectively on this one, together with all the from the department, together with ourselves. That's my interest.
All right, thank you. So Zahida, then just to Member Nkondlo's response, she's not looking for how much it's going to cost. Yeah, it's what it had previously cost. Are you covered?
Yeah, we can get that information. I'll work with our finance section as well. I just want to clarify. So then the request would go to the department as well for their costing from their side, and then ours as well.
That's my understanding, but Member Nkondlo can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. Member van der Westhuizen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In the past, we've been served with, or at least the chairpersons of committees have been served with the quotes from the various newspapers to advertise. And I think that is normally sourced, and I could be corrected, by our supply chain management processes of Parliament. I would also like to just state, and I don't think we're far away from Honourable Nkondlo's requests. The one thing that I just don't want to see is for us to drag out this process unnecessarily when certain of the processes could have run in parallel, and if certain decisions could be made, can I call it, by the chairperson who needs to manage the budget for the committee. And please keep in mind that there seems to be more amendments coming, which will also have budget implications for us. And I'm really grateful that the Honourable Nkondlo has raised this, because, every amendment does cost a lot in terms of time, but also in terms of advertisements and sometimes hiring our venues and so on. So I would also, apart from proposing that we advertise in the national newspapers on a weekend, which I do know is the most expensive time, that we also get a quote for the social media, to advertise on social media. And then I presume there's not much of a cost to advertise on the website of the WC PP. Then what we normally do is also to write to all the role players to inform
Members?
them.
Apologies, you are jumping the gun a little bit. So I do want to address these points as well. And we definitely have a plan. So if you don't mind, I'll just take us through the rest of it.
So you don't believe we can run the public comment portion in parallel to asking the questions from the department? Because
No,
that's
thank
what
you.
I'm trying to achieve. That we embark on at least getting those quotes, getting those figures, approving the public participation process. And as I've said before, I think let's at least try and schedule, because scheduling is sometimes a very difficult task for our procedural officers. Let's at least start to schedule after the closing date for public comments a date for a public hearing in Cape Town in a hybrid session. If we do see from the public response that there's huge interest and that we need to go to other towns in the Western Cape to be able to really give people an opportunity to participate because they've shown great interest in this, then that's why I said, let's not, when we schedule one, say there's only going to be one. Let's be open on that. But then also, Chair, I'm sitting with a number of resolutions that I would like to propose, but this is just in terms of the normal process once a bill has been introduced by a department to us. The request for information and so on, I'm ready to submit a number of those, even in the chat, if possible, if needed. Thank you.
Yes, November, absolutely. I do intend on running these processes parallel. So, of course, we can get this information. We're looking at an October date. If a need arises for further public hearings, then that's something that we'll have to explore. We have to remain flexible. But there's definitely no reason why we can't obtain the information and address the resolutions, as well as proceed with the public participation process. But from my side, what I was just trying to say was you are very proactive. And on my agenda, I do want to still speak to PEO engagement. I still want to talk to social media. I still want to talk to advertisements. So if you'll just allow me to go through that process. Are you covered?
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Nkondlo and then Member Seleko.
No, Chair, I was gonna say in spirit, I don't mind that. That is why I was saying we can either call an urgent meeting, so that the process, if indeed that process to repeal, is there already. So what Member Andrikas is suggesting, in principle and in spirit, I do not have an issue with, so that the request for information can always go through this committee. And I'm assuming that at least that will shorten one getting clarity and understanding of the process as it unfolds. Thanks.
Yes. And perhaps we need to focus on how we want to get that information. So maybe my suggestion is, for the sake of time, that we ask them to provide it in writing. And should we not be happy with that response, then ask them to brief us on it. That might be my suggestion. But we can explore that a bit later. Member Seleko?
Yeah, thank you very much. Morning. And I've been up and down this morning, but I'm back. So, Chair, I just, in terms of public participation, I think when it was gazetted, the draft bill for amendment in December 2022, what has been the response in that regard? Was there interest or was there no comments? I would just want to ask that, and then I will have a follow-up. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Zahida. Zahida, are you aware of the extent of public interest or comments received from the gazetting period?
Thank you, Chair. I think Member Seleko is speaking to the Provincial Treasury's process. So, but I can tell you that our gazetting process ended, and I did not get any comments at all.
All right, okay. Member Seleko, are you covered?
Yeah, I'm happy, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Member Nkotlo, can I just check, is that a legacy hand or did you still want to speak?
No, I think there's some a functionality problem on my side because I'm trying to put it down, but it doesn't. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, no problem. I'll just assist and put down your hand once you've spoken as well. All right, members. So then the next have the app. And so I can also bring in Zahida here because she has been really looking into the digital side of advertisements in quite a lot of detail. And I think it would be a first to be advertising this sort of communication on a digital platform entirely. So, Zahida, maybe if I can bring you in just to talk a little bit about what you found in the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Jay. So there's not much we can go on because, like you said, it's never been done. Supply chain doesn't know about it. The communication section doesn't know about online advertising. Anything I've heard is because I've had to phone advertisers and ask them. It's much more complicated than doing mainstream hard copy newspapers. You have to look at your cost per view, pixel. Like pick how like your picture quality you need to look at. There are so many different things, aspects, but we have asked just for a quote, just to see what the costing would be like, because at this moment we don't have any idea. So we've asked for that. I'm still waiting on that, so I can have a better idea in terms of guiding the committee on online advertising once I get that quote. But I do think your idea of a hybrid approach is good as well. Chair, you're on mute.
Member Nkondlo, thank you. Member Nkondlo, Member Seleko, I want to pick on you as well. I just want to just check in and see what your thoughts are with regards to this new approach of advertising and taking a hybrid approach to experiment.
My dear, you are speaking to eldership, so I'm sure our input on new developments and innovation would always be limited, but I'm sure we were not that much scared to try out new things if indeed they are going to get a bigger audience and they will ensure that more people are engaged. So for me, I think I've seen hybrid works because it actually tries and joins, the different generations like myself who would like to go to a meeting and be physically there, and also taking note of others who may not necessarily have data because data is very costly. So if they are able to have a place where they could converge and save the little data that they have, it assists, versus the younger version, as you correctly say, that would not necessarily take their time off because they sit in their gadgets to participate in the main, in terms of input. So I think for me, hybrid does help to try and bridge the gap. And obviously, as a committee, and I think at one point, the speaker, even the former speaker's office, we're trying to come up with these new innovations of making Parliament much more accessible. So I would give my vote to that, and I think the innovation in that regard, I think, should be welcomed.
Thank you, Member. And please don't call yourself the eldership. I do, I must say, I really do appreciate the inputs of all of my committee members. Member Seleko?
Good morning again, Chair. No, Chair, the hybrid system is the in thing. It's an innovation and it allows people to not to have an excuse to engage. So even if you are sick, you are able to log in and you still give your input. So I'm happy with that one, Chair. I don't have a problem with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll look at a hybrid approach. I think my only concern now in terms of the advertising is linguistic inclusion. So we'll get our costing back in terms of which online platform to use. But then in terms of actually reaching out to every single linguistic group, I think maybe we must just make sure we're covered by also reaching out to the burger. And then I'm not sure if Vukunzela would be a more appropriate newspaper. Perhaps I can bring in Zahida just to see what are your thoughts following this discussion.
Yes, Chair. I think the book is a good idea as well as sorry, what was the other newspaper you mentioned?
Ugunzela, I think that
yes. I think we've used that quite a bit. I can also check where we advertised in the last book.
Yeah, and then we'll be covered with the English platform online, I feel.
Yes.
I'm hesitant about using Cape Argus because I know their readership has declined significantly. So I just worry that it might not be worth it to place the advert there, but I'm open to any other inputs on that regard. All right, so then just going forward, the advert will request that interested stakeholders submit comments via email and WhatsApp. That'll include voice notes and messages like we did with copyrights. Worked quite nicely. And if stakeholders want to make oral submissions, they can also indicate that and will be invited to speak at the public hearing. What we're looking at doing is a possible placement of the advert 1 week after the briefing. Letters of the invitation will be sent to relevant stakeholders. So the stakeholders that we're looking at, and please let me know if there's any others that you think we should include, would be municipalities, gambling businesses, business chambers, unions, stakeholders that participated in the public participation process previously. Any others that you feel we should invite? Okay, nobody's saying anything, so I'm going to take that as a no.
Sorry, sir.
Yes.
No, I was saying in the chat, I'm sure Zahida and them would always consider the community newspapers because there you get access to all the official languages in the province, and in the main they are also they get into majority households. I'm not sure if the cost may be an issue, but I wrote that in the chat.
Okay, no, that's a good point. Okay, so Hida and I'll touch base on that, and we'll get back to you all on the logistics there. All right, then the next steps, procedural officer will collate voice notes, messages, email comments, and requests for oral submissions, which will be sent to the members and department. The department will be requested to respond to the submissions received on the poll. From there, date for deliberation on the submissions would be approximately 1 week after the public hearing. So if we're looking in October, we'd aim for the 1st of November. With that, members, are there any further comments or anything else that you would like to raise on the repeal bill? If not, then I would suggest we take a little bit of a breather and then we can jump into copyright and performance protection. Member van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we were told this morning that there are different, can I call it source of income, or that there are differences between the taxes and the fees from the various sectors in the gambling industry. And I would love for us just to get a document explaining that to us. Unfortunately, that was not included in this morning's presentation. Just for me to be able to understand how the changes in the environment also influence the financial positions, be it fees, be it gambling tax income, etc. So if we could ask the department for, a paper in which they perhaps just set that out. Then also, Chair, if I may propose that we ask the research section of the WCPP just to give us a little bit of insight into the funding practices of other provinces' gambling boards, as well as their financial positions. It's been my impression that the Western Cape has been doing quite well when it comes to, for example, the online gambling, and I'm grateful that some of these operators have, indicated that their can I call it their seat or their place from which they operate is in the Western Cape. So, and then thirdly, Chair, if we could just request the department for the total fees raised plus transfers received by the Gambling Board over the last 5 financial years, together with a summary of the assets and liabilities of the Gambling Board as at the end of each financial year, as well as the amounts of cash and other liquid assets on hand at the end of these years. I heard the Minister say, for example, that there are potential savings in terms of the Gambling Board's office accommodation, etc. I think that would just assist me perhaps to understand, the financial environment in which Provincial Treasury versus the Gambling Board find themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to check. There's a lot of information there, Zahida. Were you able to capture everything? Are you comfortable?
I've got it typed. I can
Okay.
email it to Ms. Adams as well. Thank you. Unfortunately, my WhatsApp on my computer, where I normally cut and paste, is not currently active. Thank you.
Oh, that's strange. If you could include me in the email too, please. I recognize Member Nkondlo.
Chair, I think I can do the same, but I would have also loved to get to understand what are these specific industry structural issues that the department would have mentioned, which are affected from the COVID-19 that have triggered this, if they could be able to specify, because you see it's sometimes difficult for us just to understand, especially the technical nature of things, if they are not explained. Because I think one would have understood in the previous engagements when the process was taking up that there would be your bookmakers, totalizators, the casino industry in general. One would wanted to understand, having looked at the implication at this evidence that they said they didn't have at the time, and which had actually now came to the fore. What exactly are those structural issues, so that we then understand what we are trying to regulate and legislate on with the new sort of amendments that will be coming in. So that's one thing I wanted to understand. Again, for me, I think it's important. I want to understand the case of Sun International Casino and around particularly the issue of constitutionality, because I recall that there was a legal opinion which we got from the department. If they can be able to provide, bring that to us together with, if there indeed is a case that they had to answer as a department against Sun International, and what was then the final conclusion of that litigation, if it has been concluded already, so that also we understand, and the department must indicate if it has or doesn't have any impact onto this repeal that you are doing. And I would think, Chair, perhaps not now, maybe into the future, whether it's post this process, we really need to have a discussion about this notion of the economic viability, of the Gambling Board, including its location. And I think it's a conversation in light of doing this comparison with the other provinces, because I would remember that there was also a briefing at some point on the national processes that were happening in coordinating the regulatory environment, where this issue was raised around other provinces that has got, the Gambling Board in their economic development. And just to juxtapose, what are the benefits between having it in a treasury function that is just a revenue collector in the main, versus being in an economic function that would be able to do studies and always be able, as part of a broad economic strategy, take note the issue of gambling regulation as an important aspect, as part of the growth aspect of the province. So I think for me, that issue of the institutional framework is very important. So I'm saying, it may not be now. Perhaps we may need to have such a conversation to try and understand the pros and cons between the institutional framework that the Western Cape has versus the other provinces, so that one is at least quite understanding of the rationale of where we are as a province. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member. I think between you and Member van der Westhuizen, you always pick fireworks off in my brain and really encourage me to think more deeply. So I appreciate your inputs a lot. Members, if there are no other resolutions, I propose that we take 5 to 10 minute break, just so we can reset our minds, have a cup of coffee, clear our desks, and refocus. And then we can join at 22. Is that in order?
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. See you at 22. Thanks, everyone. So now we're going to be wrapping up with the copyright and performance protection amendment bills. This has been a very, very long journey. And so I'm glad we're finally, oh, let me just slow down a minute. Okay, so it's been a long journey, but I'm glad that we have applied our minds to the extent that we have, and that we're finally able to come to a conclusion and hand it over. So members, as you'll note, there have been 3 versions of the bill. We started with the D bill, that was amended to the E bill, and we've now been asked to look at the F bills. And so members, I hope that you have perused the very the ample documents that you have received from Zahida with regards to these bills. That included minutes that spoke to the deliberations on the bills since the negotiating mandates were considered, particularly at the NCOP level. Members, in particular, I would just like to raise that there were the NCOP minutes of 2023, which dealt with the negotiating mandates of each province. There were the NCOP minutes of the 30th of May, which spoke to DTIC and the NCOP's legal team's response. And then there were the NCOP minutes of 20 June, which spoke to the select committees voting on the negotiating mandates, and whether these were agreed to. So members, I trust that you have already had a look at these minutes. And with that, I wanted to ask you what your responses were in terms of the negotiating mandates, and also whether or not you would be supporting or not supporting the bill. Perhaps we can start off with the copyright bill, and then from there we'll move on to performance protection. With that, that will allow us to determine our way forward in respect of the consideration of the final mandates. So if you could please indicate to me in terms of the support or not support by way of raise of hands. Members? Just want to
Can you
check.
repeat, Chair, which one are we starting with?
Copyright. So we're starting with copyright bill, and we have obviously received all the minutes. I just mentioned that there were the minutes of the 23rd of May, the 30th of May, and the 20th of June, which spoke in particular to the comments that we've made and also the NCOP's responses. And I wanted to ask if you'd perused these minutes and what your responses were to those negotiating mandates. And you know, if you're happy in terms of taking it forward, whether or not you would like to support the bill. Member van der Westhuizen? And then Member Nkondlo?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, as you will recall, we raised some serious reservations on these amendments to the Copyright Act as proposed in this bill. And I do note from the NCOP minutes that we've been highly limited in achieving the amendments that were proposed by this committee. And therefore, I believe that we should mandate our representatives there not to support the copyright amendment bill. As I recall, we actually at that stage also considered the possibility of having this legislation being referred back and for a complete rewrite of the original act, and that we argued that, you know, just, can I call it panel beating the existing Copyright Act would not achieve what one needs to achieve in an environment where, you know, there have been so many changes regarding the rights of people that create content. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. I recognize Member Nkondlo.
Chair, having gone through all these processes back and forth around this particular bill, I think we have actually, and I'm saying now from myself and my party, we have continued to raise the consideration one of noting this process, this tedious process that we have been involved in, and the fact that indeed industry does not remain the same, is not a stagnant industry like many other industries, and the fact that indeed, as we consider now, there's even issues of technology, which I think we had even agreed nor supported, I think, a view that such could not at the time be anticipated, and such work needs still to be done by the Department of Trade and Industry around, I think, the online, the whole technological space around, copyright, because it's got a dire impact. But also we took note of the fact that already there is some progress made in as far as elements of this bill, which we believe that the bill must be supported whilst the work continues, so that it provides industry certainty. Also, it repeals a very old legislation that has been there regulating the industry to the detriment of many of those that are producing or creators of content. So from where I'm sitting, Chair, I would maintain that we support the bill, considering that there is global, I think, implications as things are sitting now in this environment that we are in, both in terms of technology, but also in terms of just global economic shifts that will always present serious implications into our own industry and copyright in general. So we can't be found wanting, by always going back and forth, I think, on legislative certainty in our country. So from where I'm sitting, I support the copyright bill to go through and be signed off by Parliament. Thanks.
Noted. Thank you. Member Seleko?
Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity. Chair, I was in the NCOP, and I know when we engage with a negotiating mandate from different provinces, and in majority of input, sometimes it's ignored. And I was not even surprised that, when we got some of the report in terms of what has been considered from the Western Cape and what has not been considered. And based on that view, Chair, I would second what Member van der West says, and is saying that we should not support. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Members, this has been an incredibly technical bill with many interested stakeholders. And these stakeholders range from professors who have specialized in intellectual property their entire lives to artists who are struggling and starving to pay bills, but also to pursue their talents and careers. And what has been pressing on my mind is, how do we find the balance? How do we ensure that we are truly empowering people, supporting our creative industries, and creating an environment in which we do see growth and in which we don't have to see other cases of artists who are dying of starvation and who have contributed so significantly to our heritage and to our culture? The one issue that I feel has become central to this bill is the debate between fair use and fair dealing. And to my mind, this bill does not sufficiently address that. I would also support members that we do not support the bill and that it be redrafted in its entirety. And this has not been an easy process by any stretch, but I say this off the back of the multiple engagements that we have had I say this off the basis of all of the correspondence that we've received, all of the concerns that we have heard, and truly do feel that this is the right approach that we must be taking, especially from our province, and conferring that onto our NCOP delegates. And I do hope that other provinces have also heard this call. So with that, members, we'll now move on to the next portion of our program, whereby we will allow for the drafting. Zahida, if I could just bring you in here.
Hi, Chair. Yes, we still have to do the performance one as well before
Okay.
we go into drafting.
Would you prefer to draft and then we conclude this round, CAB, or would you prefer that we rather do the performance as well and then you can draft?
It's up to the members. I've already made changes while you were speaking. So technically the draft report is ready. But if you want to do the PPAB and then we can adopt both reports at the same time, we can do it one by one. It's completely up to the committee.
Members, what is your feeling?
Can we do one by one, Chair, and we move so that we save time?
Okay. All right. So then we'll move to performance protection. So Hida can just quickly type up everything and then we'll read it all together. Member van der Westhuizen?
Yeah, no, sorry, I misunderstood in terms of the one by one. But yes, if we can continue with the performance protection amendment bill, perhaps we must just state then that clearly that from the Western Cape, our mandate to our representatives in the NCOP is not to support this bill. And perhaps the Honourable Nkondlu may want to have her views also to be recorded in the report. I'm not sure if that can be done.
Certainly. All right. So we've focused on the CAB bill now. Members will focus on the performance protection. So if I could also get an indication now in terms of the performance protection bill, whether to support or not to support. I recognize Member van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Having gone through the minutes of the NCOP Select Committee meetings and having read the department's response, it again seems to me as if there are certain critical aspects on which our delegates were not able to convince those meetings to affect certain changes. And therefore, I propose that we from the Western Cape do not mandate our representatives to support, but rather to vote against the adoption of the Performance Protection Amendment Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Member Seleko?
Chair, I'm not going to waste any time and just support the proposal from Member van der Westhuizen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other feedback with regards to the performance protection bill?
Chair, I think my hand function, I don't know what's going on with it today.
Please just jump in. Yep.
Okay. No, thanks, Chair. I think can our view as the ANC be recorded as such that we do support the bill, and therefore I think our section, I think is clause 90, can then kick in to just record that against the majority view in the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, members. All right, members. So now that we have concluded our discussion and allowed for members to indicate their stance on the final mandates, if we can just allow the procedural officer to draft the report. Zahida, how much time will you need roughly? 10 minutes?
Thank you, Chair. 10 minutes is perfect.
Okay. Members, we will be back at 11:05. Members, is everybody back online?
Yes.
Yes, Chair.
All right. Okay, members, I'm going to table the report for consideration and adoption now. As you can see, we have the copyright bill before us now, so we'll deal with that first. I will read the report for consideration and adoption. And then from there, I'm going to ask you if you'll adopt the report. You can indicate yes or no. So I will read it in now. Committee report, final mandate stage. Reports of the Standing Committee on Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism on the Copyright Amendment Bill B13F of 2017, NCOP, dated 1 September 2023. The Standing Committee on Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism, having considered the subject of the Copyright Amendment Bill B13F 2017 of the NCOP, referred to it in accordance with Standing Rule 217, recommends that the House confers on the Western Cape's delegation in the National Council of Province the authority to not support the bill. Minority view, in accordance with the Standing Rule 90, the African National Congress expressed its minority view to support the bill. Just from my side, before I put it to you, I believe the suggestion was to not support the bill and amend it in its entirety. Members, are there any views from your side with regards to the bill? Any amendments you'd make?
To the report, you mean, Chair? I'm happy.
Sorry. Yes, to the report. Would you agree that it was to not support and amend in its entirety?
No.
No?
Chair, I think what we have in front of us is actually sufficient, because I think it's.
Sorry, remember, it seems that you're breaking up. I'm not sure if it's just on my side.
Being led.
Member van der Westhuizen, you're breaking up a little bit.
No, I stopped there. I said my impression is that our mandate is just to support or not to support during the final vote that's to be taken in the NCOP Select Committee. But I stand to be corrected. If I'm correct, then I think it is sufficient what we currently have in the report and what we should also be reporting to the House.
Okay. Could I please get some procedural guidance on this, on whether the mandate is only to indicate whether we support or not support, or whether we can also say to amend in its entirety? Perhaps Zahida or Lizette?
Okay, Chair, I think we are able to add that bit in. I just want to double check with Lizette.
Okay. And then in the meantime, members, any other thoughts on the report? Any other edits before I ask you whether we will adopt it?
Good day, Chairperson. It's Lizette.
Lizette? Please go ahead.
At this stage of the final mandate report, we have indicated in our negotiating mandate the reasons why we do not want to support the vote. At this stage in the final mandate, we can basically just whether we're supporting or not supporting the bill.
Okay. All right. Then we'll keep it as at. I'm so sorry. My English is not Englishing. We'll keep it as is. Members, I'm now going to ask you whether you will adopt the report, whether you'd like to adopt the report.
I move that we adopt the report, Chair.
Thank you. Any seconders?
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you. All right. We've officially finished with the Copyright Amendment Bill. That's kind of a relief. It's been a very arduous process. So thank you to everyone for your inputs on this process. We'll now move to performers. Okay. Thank you. You can scroll down. All right, so I'm going to read it in. Committee report, final mandate stage, report to the Standing Committee on Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism on the Performance Protection Amendment Bill B24F of 2016 NCOP, dated 1 September 2023. The Standing Committee on Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism, having considered the subject of the Performance Protection Amendment Bill B24F of 2016 NCOP, refer to it in accordance with Standing Rule 217, recommends that the House confers on the Western Cape's delegation in the NCOP or National Council of Provinces the authority to not support the bill. Minority view, in accordance with Standing Rule 90, the African National Congress expressed its minority view to support the bill. Members, if I can ask you whether or not we will be adopting the report. Member van der Westhuizen?
I propose that we adopt report as presented to us.
Thank you very much. Member Seleko?
Second is Flalo.
Thank you very much. All right, members, we have read through the report. We have now adopted our positions, our reports. And with that, members, I just wanted to check in before we do close or adjourn, if there are any resolutions or actions stemming from this. Member van der Westhuizen?
Thank you, Chair. No resolutions from this second half. I remind you that we did indeed propose and adopt a number of resolutions during the first half of this meeting. Can I just at this stage say thank you very much to you for your guidance, also particularly to Ms. Adams, if you don't mind. The volume of submissions received on these two bills, and I'm grateful that we could deal with the two in tandem, have really exceeded, I almost want to say, the norm. And to summarize in a matrix form, all of that has been a gigantic task, ably done by Ms. Adams, and obviously you had to oversee all of that, to guide that, etc. Thank you also for your guidance in this whole process. I regret that unfortunately we've not been able to get a complete rewrite of this legislation, but we've tried our utmost together with our delegates in the NCOP, I believe, and I just want to thank everybody, also those that commented on the legislation, for their input and the many hours that they've put into this. Well done to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Zahida has messaged me to say that you shouldn't thank her because it was done by DTIC, but I disagree. I think she has put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and gone above and beyond. So regardless of whether that matrix is done by DTIC, Zahida, you have done an excellent job and your work has been acknowledged. So thank you, Zahida. Members, are there any further resolutions with regards to these two bills? I see none. All right.
Correct.
Members, once again, thank you very much for the hard work. Thank you very much for the constant effort. Thank you very much for sharing your institutional knowledge and your wisdom with me. We have a tremendous burden as lawmakers to consider the information before us and to make hard decisions. But we do so in the best interest of those that we represent. And so, again, I'd like to thank you for all of your time. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend going forward, and meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.